After all that therapy, shadow work, and self-discovery, you expected liberation, but instead, you feel empty. Like a house after renovations, everything looks different, but feels hollow inside. You've done the work, peeled back the layers, faced your darkness, yet here you sit, staring at a life that suddenly feels meaningless. In the next 50 minutes, you'll discover why this void isn't your failure. It's the sacred threshold your psyche has been preparing you to cross. If you've awakened to find your old motivations dead and nothing has replaced them, you're not broken. You're not depressed. You're standing exactly where Carl Jung said true healing begins. As Jung observed, in all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order. So what's actually happening in this unsettling emptiness? Let me tell you about Maria. She's a marketing executive, 34 years old, the kind of woman who had her life together on paper. Beautiful apartment, successful career, Instagram-worthy relationships. But underneath the polished surface, Maria was drowning in patterns she didn't understand. She was a chronic people pleaser who said yes to everything and everyone except herself. She attracted narcissistic partners who used her empathy as a fuel source. She worked 16-hour days not because she loved her job, but because achievement felt like the only proof she mattered. So Maria did what all the books said to do. She spent 3 years in therapy learning to recognize her codependent patterns. She devoured shadow work materials, facing the parts of herself she'd rejected: her anger, her selfishness, her right to have needs. She read Jung, studied attachment theory, practiced boundary setting, like it was a martial art. Slowly, methodically, Maria dismantled her false self. She quit the relationship with the emotionally unavailable architect. She stopped working weekends to prove her worth. She said no to her mother's guilt trips. She learned to feel her anger without immediately apologizing for it. The healing worked. Maria could see her patterns with laser clarity. She understood exactly why she'd been attracted to unavailable partners. They mirrored her emotionally absent father. She recognized how her people-pleasing was a desperate attempt to avoid the abandonment she'd experienced when her parents divorced. She integrated the shadow parts she'd been taught were unacceptable: her ambition, her sexuality, her capacity for righteous anger. Maria became psychologically literate, emotionally regulated, and authentically boundaried. All the therapy textbooks said she should feel empowered, alive, free. Instead, Maria woke up one Tuesday morning in her now peaceful apartment, looked at her now healthy life, and felt nothing. Not depression. Depression has weight substance, a quality of heaviness that presses down on you. This was different. This was spacious, echoing emptiness where her drive used to live. The old Maria, the achiever, the helper, the one who derived meaning from being needed, had been surgically removed by her healing work, and nothing had rushed in to fill that space. She sat in her morning meditation, waiting for guidance, motivation, some sense of direction. But all she found was vast, pregnant silence. Her friends didn't understand. "Maybe you need antidepressants," suggested her sister, who'd watched Maria's transformation with growing concern. "You seem so quiet lately, so unlike yourself." "Set bigger goals," advised her career coach. "You're probably just bored. You need more challenge, more stimulation. What about that promotion you were considering?" "Stay busy," recommended her mother, who'd never been comfortable with stillness. "Join a gym, take a class, get back out there. You're spending too much time alone." But Maria knew something deeper was happening. She could feel it in her bones. This wasn't stagnation or regression. This was waiting. But waiting for what? This is where you might recognize yourself. You've done the work. You've faced the shadows. You've healed the wounds. And now you sit in this strange in-between place where two specific fears probably grip you like vices. First, you fear the emptiness means you've failed, that all your healing work was pointless because you feel worse than when you started. You see others posting about their transformation breakthroughs, while you sit in this strange numbness, wondering if you're moving backwards. Second, the people around you don't get it. They see your stillness as stagnation, your peace as passivity, your lack of urgency as lack of ambition. They want the old you, back the busy driven, always achieving you, who made them feel productive by association. They don't understand that the very motivation that once propelled you was rooted in wounds you've now healed. They can't see that your emptiness isn't the absence of life. It's the presence of something preparing to be born. Maria would lie in bed some mornings, staring at the ceiling, asking the question that haunts everyone in this phase. Why don't I feel better? I've done everything right. I've healed my trauma, set my boundaries, integrated my shadow. So why do I feel like something vital has died inside me? The answer, as Jung understood, lies not in what's wrong with the healing process, but in what's right about it. The emptiness isn't a bug in your psychological development, it's a feature. It's not evidence that something went wrong, but proof that something profound is going exactly as it should. But to understand why requires diving deeper into the architecture of the psyche itself, into the fundamental split that creates this sacred void. To understand why healing creates emptiness, we need to examine what Carl Jung identified as the fundamental architecture of human consciousness, the carefully constructed division between who we think we are and who we actually are. Jung spent decades studying the psyche's structure, and he identified two primary aspects that come into direct conflict during the healing process, what he called the persona and the shadow. Your persona is far more than just the mask you wear for social situations. It's the entire identity you've constructed to navigate life successfully, to gain approval, to avoid rejection, to feel safe in an unsafe world. The persona isn't just how you present to others, it's how you present to yourself. It's who you think you are, and more importantly, who you think you need to be to survive. Maybe your persona is the achiever, the part of you that finds worth through accomplishment, meaning through productivity, safety, through success. This persona wakes up with goals already formed, knows exactly what to pursue, feels energized by the next mountain to climb. It derives its sense of self from external validation, from being recognized as competent, successful, valuable. Perhaps your persona is the caretaker, the part that finds purpose through helping others, meaning through being needed, worth through service. This persona feels most alive when solving other people's problems, most valuable when others depend on it, most lovable when it's giving more than it receives. Or maybe your persona is the perfectionist, the part that creates safety through control, worth through flawlessness, meaning through getting everything exactly right. This persona believes that if it can just control enough variables, anticipate enough problems, perfect enough details, life will finally feel secure. Each persona, regardless of its specific flavor, serves the same fundamental function. It creates a coherent sense of self around specific strategies for survival, belonging, and worth. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss, as he explained: the persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself, as well as others, think one is. The persona, no matter how sophisticated, is fundamentally false, not because it's evil or wrong, but because it's constructed around wounds, fears, and external expectations rather than authentic nature. It's a brilliant adaptation to difficult circumstances, but it's not who you actually are. Your shadow contains everything the persona has rejected in order to maintain its coherent identity. And here's where it gets interesting. Your shadow doesn't just contain the negative qualities you've disowned. It contains your most authentic impulses, your genuine desires, your natural responses to life. If your persona is the achiever, your shadow might contain your laziness, not pathological laziness, but your natural capacity for rest, for being rather than doing, for finding worth that isn't tied to productivity. Your shadow holds your right to exist without proving your value through accomplishment. If your persona is the caretaker, your shadow contains your selfishness, not destructive selfishness, but your natural instinct to prioritize your own needs, to say no when you're depleted, to receive care instead of always giving it. Your shadow holds your right to be loved without earning it through service. If your persona is the perfectionist, your shadow contains your messiness, not chaos for its own sake, but your natural acceptance of imperfection, your capacity to try things without needing to excel at them, your ability to be human rather than flawless. Your shadow holds your right to make mistakes without losing your worth. For decades, maybe your entire adult life, your persona has been the engine of your existence. It created your goals because it knew exactly what it was trying to prove, avoid, or achieve. It generated your motivation because it was running from specific fears or toward specific validations. It drove your behavior because it had a clear mission: keep you safe, loved, and worthy, according to the rules it learned in childhood. The achiever persona was born from feeling worthless, so it chased external validation with relentless intensity. Every promotion, every accomplishment, every moment of recognition felt like proof that the worthless child was wrong, that value could be earned through effort. The caretaker persona emerged from fear of abandonment, so it sacrificed personal needs to maintain connection. Every act of service, every moment of being needed, every instance of putting others first felt like insurance against being left alone. The perfectionist persona arose from childhood chaos or criticism, so it controlled every detail to create the safety that was missing early on. Every perfect outcome, every controlled variable, every flawless execution felt like protection against the unpredictability that once felt so threatening. Here's the crucial insight that explains your current emptiness. Your healing work has been systematically dismantling this persona. Through therapy, you've recognized the patterns. Through shadow work, you've integrated the rejected parts. Through inner work, you've withdrawn your energy from the wounds that once drove you. You've stopped chasing validation with the same desperation. You've quit sacrificing yourself to maintain relationships. You've released the need to control every outcome to feel safe. You've done exactly what every healing methodology recommends. But here's what nobody prepared you for. When the persona dissolves, it takes your motivation with it, because that motivation was never really yours. It belonged to your wounds. It was powered by your fears. It was sustained by the very patterns you've now healed. This is the source of your emptiness. You've successfully stopped being motivated by trauma, but you haven't yet discovered what motivates your authentic self. There's a gap, a void between the false self dying and the true self emerging. Most people never reach this void because they never do the deep work required to dissolve the persona. They keep it in place their entire lives, continuously feeding it with drama goals and busyness, because facing the emptiness beneath feels like psychological death. but you've been brave enough to let the old you die. You've had the courage to dismantle the identity that everyone else thinks is you. You've risked the terrifying possibility that there might be nothing underneath the mask. And death, even psychological death, always includes a void, a space between what was and what will be. In nature, this is called the fallow period, when fields rest between plantings to restore their fertility. In psychology, Jung called it individuation, the process by which we become who we truly are, rather than who we think we should be. The void you're experiencing isn't a mistake in your healing process. It's the most essential part of it. It's the space that must be created for authenticity to emerge. Without this emptiness, there would be nowhere for your true self to grow. But understanding this intellectually and living it experientially are two very different things. The void doesn't feel sacred when you're in it. It feels like dying. Which brings us to the deepest, most uncomfortable question of your entire healing journey. This brings us to the question that haunts everyone who reaches this threshold. If you're no longer motivated by wounds, who are you? When you stop running from darkness, what actually drives you forward? When validation, fear, and trauma no longer pull your strings like an invisible puppet master, what moves you through your days? When the familiar fire of not good enough, or not safe enough, or not loved enough no longer burns in your belly, what fuel powers your life? This isn't a philosophical question. It's the most practical question you'll ever face. Because everything in your life was organized around the persona's agenda. Your career choices, your relationships, your goals, your daily habits, even your concept of success, all of it was structured to serve the false self's mission. Let me tell you about Marcus, a corporate lawyer who discovered this void in the most jarring way possible. Marcus had spent 15 years climbing the partnership ladder at a prestigious firm in Manhattan. His drive seemed pure, admirable, inspiring to his colleagues. He worked 100-hour weeks not because he was forced to, but because he genuinely wanted to excel. He won cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. He earned bonuses that bought him a penthouse apartment and a house in the Hamptons. Everyone, including Marcus himself, believed he was motivated by genuine ambition, by love for the law, by natural, competitive drive. His success felt earned, authentic, truly his. Until therapy began to peel back the layers. Through 2 years of intensive psychoanalytic work, Marcus began to uncover the truth beneath his drive. Every late night at the office was an attempt to prove his worth to a father who had never been proud of him. Every client victory was a desperate bid for the approval he'd never received as a child. Every bonus earned was evidence that he wasn't the waste of space his father had called him during a particularly brutal argument when Marcus was 12. His entire legal career, 15 years of what looked like authentic ambition, was actually an elaborate attempt to heal a wound that couldn't be healed through external achievement. As Marcus integrated this awareness, something remarkable happened. He began to set boundaries with demanding clients. He started leaving the office at reasonable hours. He took his first real vacation in a decade. He even began dating again, something he'd neglected during his years of obsessive work focus. His colleagues were impressed. His therapist was pleased. Marcus himself felt like he was finally living a balanced, healthy life. But then came the void. Without the familiar fire of inadequacy burning in his chest, Marcus found himself staring at his corner office, his 6-figure salary, his prestigious title, his carefully constructed life and feeling. Absolutely nothing. Not gratitude, not pride, not ambition, not satisfaction. Just a vast, echoing emptiness where his drive once lived. He would sit in meetings about cases that once excited him and feel like he was watching someone else's life. He would review contracts that used to energize him and feel completely detached from the work. He would receive praise from partners and feel nothing, no satisfaction, no validation, no motivation to achieve more. Marcus's wife panicked. She'd married the driven, successful lawyer, and now she was living with someone who seemed to have lost all ambition. His colleagues whispered about burnout depression, early retirement. Marcus himself wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake by going to therapy, if he'd somehow healed himself out of the very drive that made him successful. But what Marcus was experiencing wasn't failure. It was the natural result of successful healing. He had effectively killed off the wounded child's desperate need for paternal approval. The problem was that wounded child had been the entire engine of his professional life. Carl Jung would have recognized Marcus's void immediately. He called it the necessary space of individuation, the process by which we become who we truly are, rather than who our wounds conditioned us to be. As Jung wrote, the greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. Marcus was outgrowing his old self. The lawyer driven by inadequacy was dissolving, but the authentic Marcus hadn't emerged yet. He was in the transitional space between identities, no longer the wounded child desperate for daddy's approval, but not yet clear on who he was when that wound no longer defined him. Jung understood that this void is like being a trapeze artist who must let go of one bar before grasping the next. There's always a moment of hanging in empty space, supported by nothing but faith in the process, trust that another bar will appear, belief that the fall won't be fatal. The void you're experiencing isn't evidence that healing failed, it's proof that healing is working exactly as it should. You've successfully killed off the false motivations, but your authentic ones haven't fully emerged yet. This is terrifying because our entire culture equates emptiness with failure, stillness with laziness, not knowing with incompetence. We're raised to believe that productive people always know what they want and pursue it with relentless clarity. We're taught that healthy people have goals, plans, ambitions that create obvious forward momentum. But Jung understood something. Our achievement-obsessed world completely misses. Authentic motivation can't be manufactured, forced, or constructed through willpower. It emerges organically from a deep acceptance of who you actually are, not who you think you should be, not who others expect you to be, but who you are at the most fundamental level of your being. Marcus eventually discovered that his authentic self had completely different relationship to law than his wounded self did. When motivation began to return, slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly, it wasn't driven by the need to prove anything to anyone. Instead, he found himself drawn to pro bono cases involving family law, helping children navigate divorce proceedings. He discovered he enjoyed mentoring young lawyers, not to show off his expertise, but because he genuinely cared about their development. These new motivations didn't scream for attention like the old ones. They whispered. They required stillness to hear. They needed the void spaciousness to be recognized. They couldn't have emerged while the old drives were still running the show. This is why the emptiness is not just useful, it's absolutely necessary. Your true self speaks in whispers, not shouts. It can only be heard when the noise of false motivation finally quiets down. It can only grow when there's space for it to unfurl, like a plant that needs the darkness of soil before it can reach toward light. The key to navigating this void skillfully lies in understanding what it actually is and what it isn't. Because the difference between destructive emptiness and sacred emptiness is everything. The void is not depression, though they can feel similar to the untrained observer. Depression feels heavy. stuck hopeless, like being trapped in a dark room with no windows or doors. Depression says, nothing matters and never will. Depression carries the weight of despair, the conviction that this darkness is permanent, that life has lost all meaning forever. The void, by contrast, feels spacious, open, pregnant with possibility. It's more like standing in a vast cathedral at midnight, dark, yes, but not oppressive. Silent, yes, but not dead. The void says, nothing matters in the old way, and I'm waiting to discover what matters in the new way. Depression constricts your world until everything feels small, trapped, impossible. The void expands your world until everything feels possible, though not yet defined. Depression numbs you to experience. The void heightens your sensitivity to subtle currents of authentic desire. Depression feels like dying with no promise of resurrection. The void feels like waiting to be born. Let me tell you about James, an investment banker who learned this distinction the hard way. After 2 years of therapy focused on his anxiety and perfectionism, James hit the void like a wall. Without his familiar panic about performance reviews, quarterly targets, and client expectations, he felt completely directionless. Initially, James did what most people do. He panicked about the emptiness. His internal critic, trained by years of high-pressure performance, immediately diagnosed the void as laziness, depression, or career burnout. His family doctor wanted to adjust his anxiety medication. His wife suggested he take a sabbatical, maybe try a different career entirely. Everyone around James treated the void like a problem to be solved rather than a process to be honored, and initially, James agreed with them. He tried to force motivation by setting new goals. Maybe he'd start his own investment firm, or pivot to real estate, or go back to school for something completely different. But none of these manufactured motivations had any life in them. They felt hollow, forced, like trying to start a car with a dead battery. The harder James pushed for clarity and direction, the more empty and confused he became. Then something shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion from fighting the emptiness, or maybe it was a moment of grace. But James chose something radical. He chose to be curious about the void rather than afraid of it. Instead of treating the emptiness as his enemy, he began to treat it as his teacher. Instead of fighting to fill the space immediately, he learned to inhabit it. Instead of judging the void as evidence of failure, he began to wonder what it might be trying to show him. James began to recognize the void as what mystics throughout history have called the dark night of the soul. Not a curse, but a sacred passage. Not a sign that something is wrong, but evidence that something profound is happening exactly as it should. He started reading about this phenomenon across different wisdom traditions. The Christians called it dark night of the soul. The Buddhists described it as the groundlessness that precedes awakening. Indigenous cultures recognized it as the necessary disintegration that precedes vision quests and spiritual initiation. Carl Jung, synthesizing insights from across cultures and his own clinical observations, understood this void as the essential phase of individuation, the psychological process by which we become whole, authentic beings rather than collections of adaptive strategies. Jung observed, "We cannot change anything until we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses." James applied this principle to his relationship with emptiness. Instead of condemning the void, he accepted it. Instead of judging it as pathology, he honored it as process. Instead of trying to escape it, he learned to inhabit it with curiosity and even gratitude. The shift was subtle but profound. When James stopped fighting the emptiness, he began to notice its texture, its quality, its intelligence. The void wasn't random suffering. It had its own rhythm, its own purpose, its own gifts. James discovered that healing isn't about adding new motivation on top of old wounds. It's about removing false motivation so authentic motivation can emerge. Like a sculptor who reveals the statue by removing excess marble, his psyche was revealing his true self by removing everything that wasn't actually him. The old James had been motivated by fear of failure, fear of not being enough, fear of disappointing others, fear of financial insecurity. These fears had created enormous drive, but it was anxious, unsustainable drive that required constant external validation to maintain itself. As James sat with the void, different kinds of impulses began to emerge. Not the loud, desperate drives of his wounded self, but quiet, authentic desires that felt completely different from anything he'd experienced before. He found himself curious about sustainable investing, something that had never interested his fear-driven self because it seemed too idealistic, not profitable enough. He felt drawn to mentoring younger analysts, not to show off his expertise, but because he genuinely enjoyed watching them develop their skills. Most surprisingly, James discovered he wanted to write. Nothing professional or ambitious, just personal essays about his experience with anxiety, perfectionism, and the journey through the void. He had no plans to publish them, no goals around the writing. The desire to write emerged purely for its own sake, because the act of putting words on paper felt meaningful to him. These new motivations didn't scream for attention like the old ones had. They weren't driven by urgency, fear, or external pressure. They arose quietly, organically, like plants growing toward sunlight. They required the spaciousness of the void to be recognized, the silence of healing to be heard. James learned what you're discovering too. The void isn't the absence of your true self. It's the presence of your true self waiting to be acknowledged. It's not empty because nothing is there. It's empty because infinite possibilities are there, and they need space to reveal themselves. Now that you understand the void's sacred purpose, let's explore how to navigate it skillfully. These aren't techniques to escape the emptiness that would defeat the entire purpose. Instead, these are practices to befriend the void, honor its intelligence, and allow it to serve your individuation in the way Jung intended. Shadow dialogue practice. One of the most powerful ways to navigate the void is to maintain conscious relationship with the persona that's dissolving. This isn't about bringing the old self back, but about honoring what it gave you while consciously choosing to evolve beyond it. Once a week, set aside 20 minutes to sit quietly and have an actual conversation with your primary persona. If you were the achiever, thank that part of you for working so tirelessly to prove your worth through accomplishment. If you were the caretaker, acknowledge how hard that aspect of yourself worked to ensure love through service. If you were the perfectionist, honor how diligently that part tried to create safety through control. This isn't about judgment or analysis, it's about integration. These personas weren't wrong or pathological. They were brilliant adaptive strategies that served you when you needed them most. They kept you safe, helped you survive, even enabled you to thrive in certain ways. The fact that you're outgrowing them now doesn't negate their value or invalidate their service. You might say something like, "Thank you, achiever, for working so hard to prove my worth. I see how much you cared about my well-being, how desperately you wanted me to feel valuable and successful. I honor everything you accomplished, all the goals you helped me reach, all the recognition you earned. I don't need you to drive me anymore, but I'm grateful for everything you gave me." Or, "Thank you, caretaker, for sacrificing so much to keep me connected to others. I understand how terrified you were of abandonment, how much you believed that my worth depended on being needed." I appreciate every person you helped, every relationship you tried to preserve, every act of service you performed out of love. I'm learning to love in a different way now, but I honor your devotion. This dialogue serves multiple functions. First, it prevents the common mistake of demonizing your old patterns, which only creates internal warfare and delays integration. Second, it helps the dissolving persona relax its grip, knowing it's being honored rather than rejected. Third, it creates space for the authentic self to emerge without having to fight against the old self. Essence meditation. Each morning before checking your phone, reading the news, or making any plans, sit quietly for 15 minutes and ask yourself one simple question: who am I when I stop performing? This isn't a question to answer intellectually or analyze philosophically. It's a question to hold with your entire being, to let permeate your consciousness, to allow to work on you rather than working on it. Don't try to generate answers or insights. Simply hold the question and notice what arises. Maybe it's images, memories of moments when you felt most yourself. Maybe it's sensations, a quality of aliveness or peace that has nothing to do with achievement. Maybe it's emotions, grief for the self you abandoned, or excitement about the self that's emerging. Maybe it's just spaciousness, a vast, open awareness that doesn't need to be anything in particular. Let whatever emerges be enough. Your authentic self reveals itself gradually in moments of non-doing rather than doing. It can't be forced or constructed, only discovered. These daily sessions create consistent space for that discovery to unfold. Void appreciation. This practice completely reverses your relationship with emptiness. Instead of treating the void as a problem to solve, an experience to escape, or evidence of failure, you learn to appreciate it as valuable, necessary space. When you notice the void arising, that familiar sense of emptiness where motivation used to live, breathe into it rather than away from it. Expand to accommodate it rather than contracting to resist it. Welcome it like an honored guest rather than fighting it like an invader. Think of it this way: a room isn't empty because it's broken. It's empty because it's ready to be filled with something meaningful. Your psyche isn't vacant because healing failed. It's vacant because it's preparing for authentic occupancy. The void is like fertile soil that looks barren but is rich with potential. It's like the pause between breaths that makes breathing possible. It's like the silence between notes that makes music meaningful. It's not the absence of life, it's life preparing to express itself in entirely new ways. Truth practice. Throughout your day, especially when facing decisions or choices, replace the question, what should I do with what's true for me right now? This subtle shift moves you from shoulds, which come from the persona and external expectations, to authentic impulses which emerge from your essential nature. Sometimes the truth is, I'm tired and need rest, even when you think you should be productive. Sometimes the truth is, I'm excited about this project, even when you think you should be more cautious. Sometimes the truth is simply, I don't know yet, and that's perfectly okay. The persona always knows what it should do because it has clear rules, strategies, and goals. The authentic self often doesn't know what to do next because it's responding to life moment by moment rather than following predetermined scripts. Learning to trust "I don't know" as a valid, valuable response is crucial during the void phase. Not knowing isn't ignorance, it's openness. It's the willingness to let life inform you rather than forcing your agenda onto life. Let me tell you about Elena, a marketing executive and mother of two, who practiced these techniques after her own encounter with the void. For 18 months after intensive therapy focused on her codependency and perfectionism, Elena felt like an alien in her own life. The old Elena had been a master orchestrator, organizing everyone's schedules, anticipating every need, solving every problem before it fully formed. She derived her sense of worth from being indispensable, her identity, from being the one everyone could count on, her meaning, from making sure everyone else's life ran smoothly. Through therapy, Elena recognized these patterns as attempts to control her environment to avoid the chaos and unpredictability she'd experienced growing up with an alcoholic father. She learned to set boundaries with family members who took her caretaking for granted. She stopped working late to solve problems that weren't hers to solve. She began asking for help instead of assuming she had to handle everything alone. The changes were healthy, necessary, and celebrated by her therapist. But they left Elena feeling completely unmoored. Who was she if she wasn't managing everyone else's life? What was her value if she wasn't being constantly needed? How could she find meaning if not through service to others? Elena's family was confused and initially resistant to the changes. Where was the woman who remembered everyone's appointments, organized all the social gatherings, anticipated problems before they happened? Who was this still quiet person who said, "I don't know," when asked about weekend plans? Her husband worried she was having a midlife crisis. Her teenage children complained that she wasn't as available as she used to be. Her mother accused her of becoming selfish. Everyone wanted the old Elena back, the predictable, reliable, always available Elena. But Elena held the space, practicing the void navigation techniques with remarkable commitment. She engaged in shadow dialogue with her caretaker persona every Sunday morning, thanking it for trying so hard to keep everyone happy and connected. She acknowledged how terrified that part of her had been of conflict abandonment or being seen as selfish. She honored all the genuine care and service the caretaker had provided, while consciously choosing to love from a different place. Elena practiced essence meditation each morning before her family woke up, asking, "Who am I when I stop managing everyone else's life?" Initially, only grief arose. Grief for the exhausted woman who had sacrificed herself so completely. Gradually, other qualities began to emerge: creativity, playfulness, sensuality, curiosity, aspects of herself she'd abandoned decades ago in service of being the responsible one. When the void feelings arose, Elena practiced appreciation rather than resistance. She began to see the emptiness not as depression or laziness, but as spaciousness, room for something authentic to grow. She stopped trying to fill the space immediately with new goals or activities, instead learning to inhabit the not knowing with curiosity. Most importantly, Elena practiced truth over shoulds. When her mother guilted her about missing a family gathering, instead of automatically saying yes, what she should do, Elena asked herself what was true. Sometimes the truth was, "I want to go and spend time with family." Sometimes it was, "I'm exhausted and need to rest." She learned to honor both responses as equally valid. Slowly, Elena began to notice subtle shifts in her motivations and desires. She felt drawn to painting something she'd abandoned 20 years earlier for practical pursuits. She discovered she enjoyed cooking when she wasn't doing it out of obligation, when it became creative expression rather than duty. She wanted to travel not to check destinations off a bucket list, but because certain places called to her soul in ways she couldn't explain. Most surprisingly, Elena realized she loved her family more authentically from this empty, spacious place than she ever had from her driven, caretaking persona. When love came from fullness rather than fear, when service arose from choice rather than compulsion, when care emerged from genuine affection rather than desperate need to be needed. Everything felt entirely different. Her relationships actually improved, though it took time for her family to adjust. Her husband began to appreciate the woman who chose to spend time with him rather than feeling obligated to manage his life. Her children learned to handle more of their own responsibilities and developed greater respect for their mother's boundaries. Her friendships deepened because she was relating authentically rather than performing the helper role. As Carl Jung beautifully observed, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Elena discovered what you're learning too. The void isn't preventing you from becoming who you truly are. It's the very condition that makes authentic selfhood possible. It's the fertile darkness where your real life germinates the sacred emptiness that allows genuine desire to take root. Integration insight. What Elena learned, what Marcus discovered, what James came to understand, and what you're experiencing is this: you're not losing yourself in this emptiness. You're finally finding yourself. The self that emerges from the void isn't constructed from wounds and fears like the persona was. It's sourced from something much deeper and more reliable: your essential nature, your authentic desires, your genuine love for life expressed in your unique way. Your new motivations, when they arise, won't feel like the old drives. They'll be quieter, but more sustainable, less desperate, but more consistent, less urgent, but more enduring. They'll come from love rather than fear, from fullness rather than emptiness, from who you are rather than who you think you should be. The void serves a sacred function in your psychological development. It's not a mistake, a detour, or evidence that something went wrong. It's an essential phase of individuation, the natural process by which you become a whole, integrated human being, rather than a collection of adaptive strategies. Trust the process. Your psyche knows what it's doing, even when your mind doesn't understand the plan. The emptiness is temporary, but what emerges from it will be permanent. You're not broken. You're becoming. As we reach the end of this journey together, I want you to understand something that could change everything about how you view this phase of your life. The void you've been fearing, fighting, or trying to fix is not your enemy. It's your birthplace. You are not broken because you feel empty after healing. You are not lost because your old motivations no longer move you. You are not falling behind because you've stopped running the race that everyone else seems to be competing in with such desperate intensity. You are standing in the most sacred space a human being can occupy, the space between selves, between who you were told to be and who you actually are. This threshold isn't comfortable, but it's holy ground. It's where authentic life begins. The emptiness you're experiencing is not the absence of your true self. It's the presence of infinite possibility. It's your psyche clearing space for something authentic to emerge, something that couldn't grow in the crowded, chaotic garden of old wounds and false motivations. Think about this. Every single day, you sit with this void without filling it prematurely with new drama, new goals, or new distractions. You're performing an act of courage that most people never attempt in their entire lives. You're choosing depth over distraction, authenticity over approval, becoming overachieving. Most people spend their entire existence avoiding this void. They keep their personas in place through constant busyness, endless goal setting, perpetual relationship drama, or chronic achievement addiction, because facing the emptiness beneath feels like psychological death. But you've been brave enough to let the old you die. You've had the courage to dismantle the identity that everyone else thinks is you, including the version of yourself that you thought was you. You've risked the terrifying possibility that there might be nothing real underneath all the masks and strategies and performances. And what you've discovered is what Jung knew all along: there is something underneath. Something vast, something authentic, something that doesn't need to prove itself or perform itself or perfect itself to be worthy of existence. Your healing isn't stalling, it's reaching its most crucial phase. The phase where you stop being motivated by trauma and start being motivated by truth. Where you stop running from darkness and start walking toward light. Where you stop performing your life and start living it. This void is temporary, not because it will be filled with new drama or new wounds to heal, but because your authentic self will gradually organically emerge from this sacred emptiness. And when it does, when you begin to feel the first stirrings of genuine desire, authentic motivation, real purpose, your entire life will be powered by something completely different than what drove you before. You won't need external validation, because you'll know your worth internally, viscerally, unshakably. You won't need to people please, because you'll trust that love based on authenticity is the only love worth having. You won't need to achieve constantly, because you'll understand at a cellular level that your value isn't based on your productivity. Your worth isn't determined by your accomplishments. Your right to exist doesn't require constant proof. I want to hear from you. What has this void taught you about yourself that you never could have learned in the busyness of your old life? What's one thing you've discovered in the emptiness that you never could have found in the noise? Share your void wisdom in the comments below. Your insight might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Let me leave you with one of Jung's most powerful observations, words that have guided countless people through their own dark nights of the soul. In the depths of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer. Your invincible summer is gestating in this winter void. It's growing in the darkness, gathering strength in the silence, preparing to emerge when the timing is perfect. Trust it. Honor it. Let it teach you who you really are when all the false selves finally fall away. The void isn't your destination. It's your doorway. It's not where you'll stay. It's where you'll transform. It's not the end of your story. It's the beginning of your real story. The story of who you actually are when you're not trying to be anyone else.